And so I closed my eyes to get some sleep, and something says, wake up, you're about to die. And so I pick up my phone again and I call my husband. First person, I always call my husband first, right? And I'm like, hey babe, I'm about to die. You need to come and check on me. Get somebody to check on me. He's like, what are you talking about? I just got off the phone with you. What do you mean you're about to die? Like, what are you talking about? I said, no, something is wrong. I'm about to die. A few moments later, the machine is now going stir crazy. Like it's almost like a frenzied movie. And I see tens of doctors and nurses rush into my room and they're screaming and shouting, she's crashing, she's crashing, she's dying, she's dying. Get the intubator, get the intubator. And I said, God, do what you need to do. I black out.
What?
Every day a woman
You're watching Trish Stanley TV. Hey guys, this is Trish Stanley of Trish Stanley TV. Today we have an amazing guest. We have the lovely, beautiful, awesome Jonquette Sanders-White hanging out with us today. She's going to share an amazing story of childbirth. And we know as Black women that has always been an issue, an area of topic, but you guys do not want to miss her story because it is a story that is full of miracle. It's full of amazement, but in the end, it's a true story of God's love. So don't miss this show.
every day a woman
You're watching Trish Stanley TV.
It's time to live your dreams. Nothing's gonna stop you now.
You're watching Trish Stanley TV.
Keep going, keep going. Every day a woman reigns.
You're watching Trish Stanley TV, where the everyday woman reigns.
Every day a woman reigns.
Hey guys, welcome to Trish Stanley TV. We are sitting here with my beautiful guest, Jonquette Sanders-White. I always want to say White Sanders, but Sanders-White. And it's Jonquette, but we're going to call you Jo.
Yes.
Welcome to Trish Stanley TV. I came across you, a friend of mine shared your story, and we just happened to be having a discussion about an issue she was having with the healthcare system and the way everything is, these doctors and all of that. And so she sent me your story, and it really, really, really inspired me, and I had to have you on. But before we jump into that, just share who you are, a little bit of your background, and we know you're an author. We'll talk about that here, but also share your transition from career, because I'm also a huge advocate for pivoting in our lives. But if you
Okay,
will.
absolutely. Well, I started off in PR and marketing. That's what I went to school for at Georgia Southern. Got my bachelor's and master's, and always been very leadership minded. So instead of actually joining an agency, I started my own.
Okay.
And I did that for about a decade, so about 9.5, 10 years. And then, of course, alongside of that, right, my actual career, I did interior design.
Yes.
Loved making the home beautiful, and I know we'll talk more about that. And just, my home life. But that also gave me the opportunity to homeschool my boys. We have a little girl now, and then also just be home to take care of home. I believe that it's equally important to be present outside in the world, but also at home. And then, of course, when everything happened with my incident, I had that 1 year of long, extreme, recovery. I'm still recovering to some extent, but that year was opportunity for me to say, okay, a new season is coming for me. So I made that shift to focus on helping other people make their homes beautiful.
Right. And so when you went through the shift, I know it was during a process, but how did you feel? How did that change? Okay, I need to change this. I need to pivot. Even though you were in a situation that we're going to expound on here a little later, was it a hard transition from going to corporate to being a creative? Because now you're a creative because you're creating these beautiful looks, but you were very much corporate prior to that.
Absolutely. And I think, I would say for me at least, because a lot of what I focused on was business growth from the marketing and PR aspect. So I had opportunity to dabble in that creative side, right? It was always there.
Okay.
But I think for me, the most uncomfortable part was the pressure that I felt to switch from what was comfortable for me.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm used to making a certain amount. I'm used to things falling into place. But then there came that bridge of saying, okay, is the grass greener on this side? Will I be able to,
sustain and
absolutely.
maintain?
But, life has a way of putting us under pressure, and if you don't move, you're going to get crushed.
That's right.
So you better move.
And you moved.
Right.
When I was doing my research on you, there were a couple of things that I loved. I love the story of making honey. How did you come up with it? I know you're a bee lover. You
Oh,
love
my
bees.
word. Y'all, I'm so Southern at heart. I love me some bees. I do. So I just fell in love with bees from a very young age.
Okay.
I mean, you walk into my home, I have bees everywhere, and not just bees, honey bees, but I also love honey just as equally, right? From phone cases to candles to jewelry and shoes,
Right.
honey bees are everywhere. And well, for me, it's just a reminder. I think about the Proverbs 31 woman, and at one point in my life, I would be so busy in work, right? Or even though I'm home, I'm not home, right? So I'm not really present, right? And then, if I'm not at work, then I'm thinking about home. I'm like, okay, well, how do you find that balance? And, as I learned about bees and, looked into things like beekeeping and, I just, again, Secret Life of Bees, one of my favorite movies,
Yes.
one of my favorite books, and just all bee movie, right? And one thing about me is I just take lessons from life.
Wow.
And bees have always been ever present, right? I mean, even down to, and I'll share this with you afterwards, maybe you can show some clips, but even driving up to license plates that'll say things like honey, that'll say beekeeper.
Okay.
Or bee season, right? How often do you run into license plates that say bee season, right?
Right.
I mean, even from a prayer, God, what season am I in? Oh, this is bee season.
Okay.
So God, why are bees so important to me? And what lessons do you want me to learn from this, right? I take everything and I try to learn a lesson from it. And for me, it was that you can cultivate both. Like, I know you're a leader,
Right.
but even the highest of the CEOs, they go to work to take care of home.
Right.
Right? So leadership ultimately begins at home. And so it was a reminder for me that if I take care of home, right, if there's not much chaos, if I keep it beautiful where my kids wake up or my husband wakes up and I'm my best self at home, then they can go out and be their best selves in the world, right? You think about bees, how they're in their hive, right? You take care of that hive. They take care, make sure everyone's
take care
fed
of
with
that
the
queen.
honey. They do,
Yes.
right? But then when they go out into the world, it affects the world in a positive way, right? Because they're taking care of that home. So that's where that whole shebang of making honey, I live my life by that philosophy. Is I just aim to make honey, and I hopefully, by making honey at home, my children can go out and my husband can go out and do
be
the
best
same.
them. Yeah,
Be the
I
best.
love that.
Yeah.
That is so sweet. And then even today is you and your husband's anniversary.
It
So
is.
congratulations.
Yes, thank you, thank you.
And marriage is not, we're going to just dabble just in this just a little bit, and then I want to go on and move on to your book. But I have had many conversations with girlfriends and others regarding marriage. And what has been in the 6 years, what has been the biggest learning lesson for you, just in the marriage part, not the children,
Right.
just in your partner for life?
Right. One, there are seasons to marriage, right? So if you get married, right, there's going to be time for you guys, but then there's also time where you don't, especially with us, we have 4 kids under 7, right? So, we're super, super busy, right?
Yes.
But knowing that there are different components of marriage, right?
Yeah.
And there are different buckets in life, or I'll say seasons, that you'd have to pour into. And in this season, I would say one of the biggest things that I've learned is that all we have is each other. I guess that is...
Y'all have each other's back.
We have each other, right?
Yes.
And so we've learned to master the help meet part, right? So baby's crying, right? Before he can turn his head, I'm there with the bottle, right? Or he has the diaper and vice versa, right? So we're learning to be teammates. That's one. And then 2, people always say, okay, you make time for your marriage and things like that. You do, but it just depends on the season of life. Sometimes we have to be okay with the season that we're in. But even opportunities like this, today's our anniversary. We have sitters at home. And guess what we're going to do? We're going to go out to eat right after we get it.
It's going to be y'all time.
Absolutely. So, right, just recognizing where you are and knowing that because this doesn't feel as stable as one season of your life, it doesn't mean that your relationship is rocky.
Right.
It just means that you have to adjust, and because you have a partner, that's easier to do.
Yeah. That's huge to only been married 6 years.
Right.
I've been married 25 in July.
Oh, wow.
And for you to learn that in 6 years, I probably learned that year 10 or 11. So I think that's amazing. I think
thank you.
it shows your maturity as far as being a woman, period, but also being an excellent wife. So husband, you did an excellent job when you picked this one, okay? Okay, so let's move on and talk about your book. You know, I'm excited about that. It's not just the book. You put it in a book, but it's really your life. It's your story.
Right.
And so let's talk about it. The book is titled Penciled Purpose, an incredible story of faith, resilience, and trust in God's divine plan. That's the title of the book, and it's available
On Amazon, on my website.
Okay. So that's where we know we can go and pick it up. But just put everything in your terms as far as what caused you to write this book and your whole journey regarding this book.
Like you said, I've learned a lot, right, in my few years here on earth. Definitely still a whole lot more to learn, right? Even the smartest man knows he knows nothing at all.
Yeah.
But this was an opportunity for me to take my experience, right? And I'm like, okay, well, what if this is my only book that I ever write, which is not. I have many more that are coming out, right? Like I said, even this one's on Amazon, Barnes & Noble. You can find it pretty much anywhere.
Okay.
But with this book, it was an opportunity for me to say, okay, if this is my only book that I write, what's the one biggest lesson that I've learned? And that is to write in pencil.
Yes.
Right. Yes, my story. I'm walking you through my journey and this story, this mishap that happened during my pregnancy and my childbirthing experience. But ultimately, I've learned that for someone like me who is an ultimate, like I'm a planner down to the core. I can tell you what we're going to be doing the next 5 years. I'll tell you all the benchmarks and we're going to hit it. right? That's just me. Right. And I'm even going to say, God, you walk with me, God, but let me take this first step. You just have my back, right? So I've just always been that person, but I've learned in life, even from the death of my mom, right, to our son getting sick, from something called Kawasaki, right? All these things, like listen, Joe, I love that you're a planner, right? And I trust that you can plan well, but you have to leave room for me. And this is God. You have to leave room for me to write and erase as I please. Because one thing about God is, I can plan for the future, but He sees it, right? He sees the ending from the beginning. And so why not trust somebody like that, right? So I've learned to ultimately plan, right? Write all these plans, have these things in mind, but to trust God. So I don't write in pen. When I write in pen, it's permanent. Yeah. Meaning that I'm upset when things don't go my way, when my expectations are not met. But when I write in pencil, that gives God room to write and erase as He pleases, but that also gives me room to give myself grace.
Yeah. Right? I love that.
So that was
writing in pencil is what you title it. I love it.
Yeah.
I'm just telling y'all, this is a gem right here. We're going to try to stay within our time frames, but I ain't making no promises. Okay, so let's talk about Penciled Purpose and your story. Let's just dig into, this was 2019?
2022.
Oh, 2022, I'm sorry. Yeah. 2022 that all of this happened. And like I said, I read your story. Your story went viral. But share with us, start from the very beginning. You said you have 4 babies.
Yes.
This happened with the last baby?
Yes, our last baby.
And so you have had previous experience with having childbirth.
Right.
And were they all C-sections?
They were.
Okay.
Yep, they were. So we were familiar with the procedure, process. I mean, I've never had any complications, nothing. And, in fact, with this baby, we had it planned for the week after Thanksgiving. But I just had that mother's intuition that week prior, a few days before Thanksgiving. And I tell my doctor, I'm like, hey, I'm going to have this baby soon. Can we go ahead and have this baby before you go out of town? And he's like, no, you've never went into spontaneous labor. You shouldn't have any issues. But Trish, I just knew it. Yeah. I knew I was going to have that baby this week. Again, I've been pregnant 3 times. I know when a baby's coming, right? So I just knew. But, he instead of going ahead and doing that procedure, We kept it scheduled for that following week, and that Wednesday, the day before Thanksgiving, about 5 o'clock that morning, my water ended up breaking, which was exciting for me because I'm like, okay, see, my body can do exactly what it was meant to
Right.
do. You know, all this time I've always been pressured into C-sections, you know, for the promptness of it, right, or what for whatever reasons. But I'm like, see, my body can do. But I knew, you know, with previous C-sections, I needed to get to the hospital.
Right.
You know, there could be anything.
Right. Because pause you there. Because they say that once you've had a C-section,
You have to have
then
a
you have
repeat.
to. Yeah. It's
And
a
that's
repeat.
not true at all.
Okay.
That's false. But of course, you know, the less you know, the more likely you'd be willing to respond to the answers, right?
Right.
But even in that stance, my water ended up breaking, and so we call our in-laws to come and grab the boys for us, and then my husband and I, we rush to the hospital. We get there about 6 o'clock that morning, and when we get there, it's pretty quiet, so you can tell not many people are there. And actually, the nurses tell us we're the most action they've had all night.
Okay.
So they get in and they check my to see if my membranes had ruptured, so to see if my water had broken, and they confirmed. And then they stated that they were going to call the doctor on call. However, I knew that my doctor was leaving that day to go out of town. He had already told me. But to my surprise, and my husband's surprise, it was my doctor who was on call.
Oh.
And so, however, they told us that he was getting ready to leave and, you know, he wouldn't be there too long. And they called him and he said that he'll go ahead and do my C-section because it was important for me to have someone familiar who had known, you know, who had been with the past 9 months. So they start prepping us. And as they're prepping us, I'm looking at my husband. I'm like, they're moving so fast. And he's like, yeah, they are. We've been through this 3 times, and we've never felt this rush. And we're looking like, why would they even be rushing? Like, there's nobody here.
Right.
But don't think anything of it. And I think it just had to do with my doctor, you know, leaving town
Wanting to
or
go out of
for
town.
whatever reason.
Okay.
But, you know, they prep me. Then a nurse takes me. She wheels me back in the wheelchair. And as she's wheeling me back, I'm looking at the walls and the numbers on the doors in the hallway, and I could feel the wind hit my face. And I turned to her and I'm like, what's the rush? And she's like, well, you're not on schedule for a C-section today, so we have to get you in and out. Our first C-section is scheduled at 7. And I said, okay. And I'm thinking to
Wow.
myself, like, don't people have babies all the time? Like,
Right.
isn't labor usually spontaneous? But again, we didn't want anything negative, no negative thoughts, so don't think anything of it. Get to the OR, get there, they do my spinal. And then my husband comes in after he puts his PPE gear on. They perform my surgery, my C-section. Baby's perfectly healthy. Smallest baby at 7'10". All of my other babies were 8-pounders. So she's the smallest of them all. But she's perfectly healthy.
Okay.
They close me up. They close me up and they take me to PACU. And usually, Trish, in PACU, I'm only there about an hour.
Okay.
You know, once the anesthesia wears off, I get the feeling in my legs.
Right.
Go back to the room. But this time, I'm in there for not 1 hour. Not 2 hours, but 3 hours.
Wow.
And I'm stable, you know, vitals are all good. Everything is, I mean, perfectly fine. And I, you know, asking them questions and they're like, well, you're bleeding a little more than we'd like you to be bleeding, but nothing emergent. You're stable. Nothing we're worried
So you
about.
didn't feel...
I felt fine.
Okay.
Yeah, completely fine.
Okay.
But they... About 10 minutes later, they had my doctor come back. I'm not sure if he had left the hospital or what was the issue, but apparently they say your doctor's on the way back to the hospital. So he comes back and he says, hey, Jonquette, you're bleeding a lot more than we'd like for you to be bleeding. And unfortunately, we're going to have to do a hysterectomy.
What?
And of course, you know, as I told you, I'm one of those people, I'm very aware. Like I do all of my research prior. I'm on top of it, right? But I've heard a million stories and how we died 3 times the rate of our counterparts, right? Of women dying during childbirth from bleeding out. So if a doctor's telling you you're bleeding, let them fix it. Right. That's my thought, right? So I'm like, okay, well, he's like, well, you know, I've been through, you know, usually when this happens, we do the hysterectomy, it'll stop the bleeding. And my thing and my husband's thing was like, let's stop the bleeding. Right. So my husband comes back right before they take me back to do the hysterectomy. We, of course, we pray, you know, because this is odd for us. We had never been through anything like this. But we pray and we think everything is going to be fine. And, you know, my doctor tells me not to worry. We're going to put you to sleep this time because it's your second surgery in 3 hours. So they put me to sleep, wheel me back into OR. Then he calls another partner to help him perform my hysterectomy.
Okay, now, he's saying you have to have a hysterectomy, but he never told you where he thought the bleeding was coming from
Nope.
or why you were bleeding. We just got to give you a hysterectomy.
That's it. And, and I've had these questions, even after the whole incident, right? And have been trying to get answers, but, my estimation and many other doctors' estimation is that there was a rush to just get out of town because it's the holiday.
Absolutely.
And this is just being completely transparent and honest, right? It was a rush because they didn't do their due diligence of checking to see where I was bleeding. In fact, my hysterectomy, turns out later, was unnecessary. Unnecessary, but we'll get there. So they put me to sleep and performed my hysterectomy, him and another partner, and they leave. And I'm left under the care in PACU this time with a third partner. However, during PACU this time with the third partner, my hemoglobin goes from a 13 to a 3.7, which is critical, meaning 3.7, you've lost your blood, right? But instead of them checking to see where I was bleeding, that's sure sign that I'm actively bleeding. If my blood is gone and I'm having tachycardia and different symptoms, she's actively bleeding. But instead of this third partner doing what they're supposed to do, right, I've already had a hysterectomy to fix the bleeding, but I'm still showing signs of bleeding. Instead of taking me to get a CT scan or anything.
Are you conscious during this time?
Everything I'm telling you is because of records.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And from talking to different staff and personnel, right? People who've told me different things.
Okay.
But instead of taking me to get a CT scan, they instead just gives me 2 units of blood. When I've lost all of it, 2 units will only take me up a few units, right? Still need way more than that. They give me that blood and just send me in the room with my husband and my baby while I'm actively bleeding. I'm in there, coming off of the anesthesia, not feeling weird. Anesthesia makes you feel groggy and, it makes you suck. It feels like you suck. Yeah. But, my husband's talking to me. He's just checking on me, how you doing? Baby's kind of over there. I hadn't had an opportunity to hold her yet, but I'm just not feeling good. And the doctors and nurses are sort of in and out of the room. I can kind of see them looking at me. They go off into corners and they'll come check my belly. And they'll put a string around it, every hour or so just to check. And my belly was growing. Wow. On top of that, every 15 minutes, the machine was going off because my resting heart rate was extremely high.
Yeah.
Usually your resting heart rate is anywhere between 60 to 100. Mine was in the 150s up to 160s. So these are a million other signs that I'm actively bleeding. This is 2022.
Yeah.
Right? This is recent. This is...
Right.
But I'm actively bleeding. And then after about 5 hours of being in that room with a million signs that I'm still actively bleeding, they finally decide to send me to ICU. So by this time, it's about 11 o'clock at night. I had my baby 7 o'clock that morning.
Wow.
So I've been bleeding this entire time.
Wow.
And so they take me up. My husband and I pray again, right? Still haven't met baby girl yet. And they take me up to ICU. Get to ICU, believe it or not, Trish, I start to perk up.
Really?
Anesthesia wore off completely. And I'm just fine. I'm talking to my husband. We're on the phone. He's being a great husband. Like, baby's beautiful, just like you. Hope you feel better. I can't wait for you to come back down. All the amazing things, right, that he's supposed to say in that moment. And we're talking, and then he's like, "But you sound tired. You need to get you some rest." And so I say, "Okay, I'm going to try to go to sleep."
And you're back in ICU?
I'm still in ICU at this point. And he's still down there with the baby on the regular labor and delivery floor. And so I close my eyes to get some sleep. He texts me and I text him back and close my eyes again. And something says, "Wake up, you're about to die." And I open my eyes and I'm like, "What? Why am I having these, what?" And then, "No, you're really about to die." And so I pick up my phone again and I call my husband. First person, I always call my husband first, right? And I'm like, "Hey, babe, I'm about to die. You need to come and check on me. Get somebody to check on me." He's like, "What are you talking about? I just got off the phone with you. What do you mean you're about to die? What are you talking about?" I said, "No, something is wrong. I'm about to die." And he heard that in my voice and he knew. And so, of course, he jets and he takes the baby to the nursery. He is rushing up. He tells someone at the desk, to call the ICU. Something's going on with my wife. And then he jets to the elevator, try to get up to me. He's on the phone. He's like, stay with me. But all this time, after I tell him that time, like, something is wrong, I'm about to die, it was like a switch turned on where I started to hallucinate and see double. I'm getting really thirsty. I'm starting to hurt. And the machine started to go off like in the ICU this time. So it's just going off like crazy. And a nurse comes in the ICU and she's like, are you watching something scary? Why is your heart rate really high? Like, why is your heart rate? Did you Google something? Like, what's wrong? And I'm like, no, ma'am, I didn't Google anything. I'm just not feeling well. And she says, are you on the phone? And I said, yes, ma'am, I am. And she gets the phone and she hangs up the phone on my husband. And of course, on the other side, he's
freaking out,
right.
I'm sure.
He hasn't even made it up there yet. But by the time he does get up to ICU, they shut the door on him, tell him he can't come back. But when she hung up my phone, a few moments later, the machine is now going stir crazy. Like, it's almost like a frenzied movie. And I see tens of doctors and nurses rush into my room and they're screaming and shouting, she's crashing, she's crashing, she's dying, she's dying. Get the intubator, get the intubator. And I'm just looking at them like, oh my God.
So you're hearing all of this.
I'm hearing it, but it was like I could still feel my body shut down.
Wow.
So my mind cognitively is aware and is there, but I know something's going on with my body. And I look at the machine and I see that my heart rate is extremely high, like it's beating, but my blood pressure is dropping because it has no blood to pump. And I'm like, okay, yeah, I'm dying. But it got to a point, Trish, where I hurt so bad and I said, God, do what you need to do. I black out. Now here's the kicker. I am a believer.
Yes.
I do believe in Jesus.
Absolutely.
But I've always imagined, right, that when I died, I would be like an angel, right? I would see the pearly gates and I would see the white roads and I just would see the celestial. I didn't see the angels. I didn't hear it. I didn't see it.
Yeah.
Right. But when I woke up, I woke up in this field. So I didn't instantly think I was in heaven or wherever I was, right? I just like, where am I? I was just in the hospital. And when I was in this field, I'm looking around, I see hundreds of thousands of people, all ethnicities, all races, shapes, and sizes in this field. I'm like, where in the heck am I? And I look at my body, it's like, okay, well, I know I just had a baby, but I don't see a pregnancy mummy belly here. Like, where's that?
Right.
And I'm like, okay, where am I? I could hear like streams of water. I could smell the air, like my senses were heightened. Like every color looked vibrant. Almost like your old set.
Yeah.
Right? Where all the colors are boom, boom, boom. No. This place was really, I could see that the grass was extremely green, right?
Wow.
It was just beautiful. And then I look back out on that field and I see two of my uncles had passed away. I went to their funerals. And I'm like, okay, well, God, did you really just let me die? Like, no way. You did not let me die. Now, Trish, I'm not perfect by all means. But if God got a book and it's somebody who's living by that book,
say it's you.
It's me, right? And again, knowing that I'm not perfect at all, right? But that's the human side of me, right? To say, oh God, you can't let me die now, right? Right? And I'm like, God, well, who's going to raise my children?
Right.
My husband's there, but who's he,
he's going to need help.
Right.
Yeah.
And I'm like, are the boys going to blame their sister for this? Who's going to be there for the graduation? I started being a woman. Who's my husband going to remarry? Nobody's going to love him like I love him.
Right.
Then I'm like, does he even know where the insurance papers are?
Right.
I did all of this stuff. Then I'm like, who's going to cook dinner? All of these crazy thoughts, right? But it felt like it happened like 5 seconds. Then instantly it left.
Wow.
So it's like wherever I was, those thoughts, those feelings couldn't exist. Because these people who were out there, it was almost like they were in their own little bliss, like in their own little world. And I instantly start to feel that same peace come over me in the presence of what?
Yeah.
Right? Because I told you it was a field.
Yeah.
And I started to say, well, God, I acknowledge the presence of God. Let me say that.
Yeah.
Because I could feel it. And I said, well, God, I trust you. You've taken care of me my entire life on earth.
Yeah.
And even though this is not my plan for my children, for my husband, for me, I have no choice but to trust you because ultimately they're yours.
Yes.
And I said, so all of my plans I had for them, even to protect them and all these things, so you have to do this. They're yours. And I really, for the first time in my life, Trish, like, and I'm somebody who prays, I spend time with God, and I try to do the right thing. But this is truly the first time in my life that I surrendered.
Wow.
And I gave my children and my babies to God.
Yeah.
The very first time.
Yeah.
And I surrendered, and I let them go.
Yeah.
And I started to walk out into this field. And as I'm walking out into this field, I see my mom. My mom is the only person in this place that acknowledged me.
Okay.
And so she was sort of looking off. And I told you I'm talking, right, when I was having this dialogue with God, like, how did you let this happen? It was all cognitive. Nothing was verbal.
Right. Okay.
And so my mom is sort of looking off in the field, and she gives me this look, like the mama look, like, don't you play with me, look. Like, you get back to your husband and your babies. And she meant what she said, right? And what sticks with me to this day is that when my mom passed away, I only had one baby. How did she know I had multiple?
Right.
Right? For her to say that. And my mom passed away 3 months before my wedding.
Wow.
Right? You know, so it's just all these things that I still question to this day. Like, how did you know all of this?
Yeah,
Right?
yeah.
But right after she said that, she disappeared. And I saw my husband and I get baptized on the beach, something we've always wanted to do together. And then I saw all 4 babies get christened. Granted, I haven't held my baby girl and saw her in the face, but I saw her in that moment.
Yeah.
I woke up 2 days later. That felt like 1 minute. And when I woke up, turns out that my husband, they had told him, basically he'd waited for hours in that waiting room. I ended up going into shock. And by the time they came to get him, they basically told him that I was dead, like I wasn't going to make it. I was on life support, and they actually walked him back, had him sign the papers. I was cold. I was not there, right? And they basically said that, you know, we're going to take her back for a 3rd surgery. It turns out that her artery was cut. So I didn't have a uterine bleed. I had an artery bleed. Had they done their due diligence to find out what had happened, all of this could have been avoided. All of this,
and
even
the
my
rushing
recovery,
is what
the
started
rushing
it.
is what started it, and the negligence and everything else is what kept it going up until the point where I went into shock. Right, even down to the point where they had him sign his papers, and he said there was something that sort of like almost like a voice for him too, is like, okay, you can't really be her husband in this moment. I need you to be her champion. Like, I know this is sad, this is whatever, but you have to champion for your wife. And he said as they were continuing to talk to him about my situation, you know, I had lost all the blood in my brain and everything. I basically be a vegetable. If they did bring me back, right? And he's like, you know, he's listening to him, but it's going to one and not the other. And he said he went back to the room after he signed those papers. And he said he started praying. And he said he prayed so hard that he sweated. He's never done that before. And then he said, you know, he started reminding God of what he promised us. Right? And this is the writing in pen that we're talking about, because those promises, this situation, it is not God's plan for me to go through that at all. We live in a broken world. It happened. But God is a redeemer. Right? And so my husband started to talk to God, and he remembered when we were in college. We started dating in college, and I told him that, I said, you're my husband, we're going to have 4 children. And I just remember him thinking I'm crazy. Like, there's no way we're having 4 children. Like, we're not having 4 kids. Like, I don't know what. And I told him, I said, no, seriously, I saw you standing in front of me. I was on a stage accepting an award. You were there, and there were 4 children next to you. And he said, God, we have the 4 kids. But my wife, you know, they're saying these things about my wife. And if she dies, that means you're a liar. And he said, but God, you're not a liar. So she can't die. Because this vision has to come to pass. And he said from that moment on, he started proclaiming my healing, that I was healed. And it's so funny because the only person who told me anything about my situation were doctors that I reached out to outside of this, nurses, people who looked over my records, and the one guy who performed the 3rd procedure on me of embolizing my artery. He was actually getting ready to leave the hospital in a few months. He said he was the only one there. And so when I walked in, who could actually help me? Like, he was the only one who was able to do that. And he said when they wheeled me back to him, I was on the bed, and I had over 3 gallons of blood in my stomach. All of my blood I bled out. And he said, he remembered telling them, what do you guys want me to do with her? She's dead. I can't fix anybody dead. This is a dead woman. He said, but something changed his mind. And he said he's so glad that he changed his mind. He said as he had to give me over 21 units of blood on that table. He said he could see it as he's giving me the blood, my belly's getting bigger and bigger and bigger, because he said there are two things he can't understand. He said one was they didn't just nick you. He said it was a cut, like a gash. He said, that's why you bled out in 4 hours in the PACU that second time, because it was a cut artery. He said, so I'm not sure how they missed that. And then he said, two, I don't know what kept you alive so long with no blood. He said he's been doing this so many years and he never seen a thing happen. And I'm like, so you're saying I'm a miracle? And he's like, well, I'm not going to say it's a miracle.
Yeah,
and I'm going to say all the odds were in your favor that night.
Yeah.
You know, and I just thank God, you know, that all things turned out well. I mean, my recovery was really rough. I had to learn how to walk again.
Wow.
My husband was given the task of taking care of me and my other, a newborn baby, right?
Yes.
And 3 other kids, right? For a long time. I had to let that belly absolve naturally, so that took months.
Okay.
And that's when I was able to start walking again. I ended up getting jaundice, diabetes insipidus, Sheehan syndrome, all of that. I didn't even get to meet my little baby until 3 weeks later.
Wow.
So it was a lot for us, and I'm still going through some things from that incident. But you know, I'm just grateful to be here to tell this story and to shine light on God's glory, and to just let you know. My biggest thing from this is, like I was saying earlier, like it's not even a wake up call, but for me, it's a reminder that God sees you.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, God loves my children enough to give him their mama. He loves my husband enough to give him his wife, right?
And
He loves me
you.
enough,
Yes.
right, to keep me here to fulfill this purpose that he has for me. Right? We hear so many stories of so many Black women dying.
Yeah.
But also I know that not only am I here to give glimpse and light to the glory of God, but I have to be the voice for my sisters.
Yes.
I have to.
Yes.
They're not here. I have to be the voice for their babies.
Yes.
I went through this.
Yeah.
I have the pictures of how these women get buried.
Yeah.
Right? It happened to me. But God has me here, and
And I'm sitting here and I'm hearing the story and of your life. It's like, what would you do? What could you have done differently? There's nothing you could have done. You're naturally in labor, so you're naturally going to go to the hospital to be cared for. But then you have the doctor that you're used to having.
right.
And then all of this just happens. How can we, in your opinion, as women of color, what is it that we can do? Like we were talking offset, and I was telling you that probably when I first moved to Atlanta, which was 30-something years ago, I made up my mind I wanted all Black female doctors. And I've been graced by God for that. But the reason why I requested that was because we tend to give a little bit more care. We have a more sensitive ear to what is being told to us. But what else can be done? What do you suggest that we do as women of color when it comes to our doctors and this ongoing tragedy that we're dying in childbirth, we're dying unnecessarily? The first thing that was a question mark in my mind, first thing I want to do is a hysterectomy.
Right.
And they don't even know the whole story.
No. And on top of that, I'm 29 years old. 29. Right. So I have all these other things, you know, from that history. So it's just, there's a whole lot to grasp from the situation. And I wish, and I truly wish, from all the research I've done, from all the living, you know, previous pregnancies, all of this, people telling their stories, Serena Williams. I mean, you think.
You said something offline and I want you to repeat. You said status doesn't matter, color doesn't. Color does matter. Status doesn't matter. Being rich doesn't matter.
It's
the bottom line. They see Black.
It was, and I'm one of those people, right? And I always thought I was probably one of their favorite patients, right? And just to be completely honest, the way that the camaraderie that we had, and you know, it's just, it didn't matter in that moment. My job title, my career, how kind I was. None of that mattered. How educated I was, how proper I spoke, right? Or how Southern I spoke, right? None of that didn't matter. They just saw me as a Black woman. And, you know, so I guess any advice if I could give to other women of color is, one, do educate yourself. You can never have enough education in regards to your life and your health, right? Two, advocate for yourself. And that is more than just verbally saying and speaking, but that is doing the due diligence of finding people who are going to be in your corner.
Yeah.
Right. So find you, if you can't find a black doctor, find you a doctor of color.
Yes.
Right. And I'm not saying that all of our doctors of our counterparts are the same. That's not true. I've ran into some really great ones.
Right.
Right. But you just start to look at the data and the statistics, and you have to err on the side of what is the trend.
Yes.
So you have to do those things in your favor, and what you can't do, you just have to leave it up to God.
Yeah. And you have to trust your gut, because one of the first things that you said was, I'm having this baby before they have me scheduled. So you already knew within yourself, you listened to yourself, you were in tune to your own body. And I think that is a number one thing we as women have to do. We have to sit back sometimes, shut up, and really listen and be in tune with what's going on in our body, because our body will definitely tell you something's not right.
Right.
So I'm so glad, I'm so thankful that you've shared your story. I thank God that He has restored you to life, and that you can share this story everywhere, anywhere.
Absolutely.
And so what can we expect? We see this story, we hear your story. This is a story of the Penciled Purpose. What more do we get from Penciled Purpose, the book, outside of your story?
So, I mean, ultimately it's just the writing pencil.
Okay.
I mean, and that's how I'm living my life.
Yeah.
From this point forward is, to trust the plans, to not trust just my plans, but to trust God's plan. I mean, I've always been a firm believer, but even my strength in whatever happens, good, bad, ugly, beautiful, more beautiful, right? More beautiful. But I have to trust Him, and that's how. I mean, if you get anything from this session, right, of meeting with you, from reading that book, and from looking at my life. Is to write in pencil and to make life beautiful.
Yes.
That's it. That's what I'm doing. And that may look like interior design. That may look like dates with my husband. That may look like, part with my babies, right? Getting down, playing with Legos or whatever. Maybe writing more books.
Yeah.
But that's what I'm doing. I mean, if anything outside of this book is still the same principle.
Yeah. I love it. I love it.
Yes.
I'm so glad you could come and hang out with me.
Yes.
And in parting words, just share any words, speak to our viewers, and anything that you want to inspire and encourage them in, what is it, making honey?
Yes.
Or writing in pencil?
Okay.
You pick.
So I'm doing making honey.
Okay.
I'm all about the bees. All about the bees. So yes, guys, make sure that, I know we live in a time now where society, right, in this world has pushed us into this hamster wheel, right, of always moving faster, right, until the point where either you're going to fall off or you're going to fly off, right, or you can have the opportunity to get off. I want to encourage you to take a step to assess where you are in life, right, and to realize what's truly most important.
Yeah.
And it's those people, even if it's just you, it's you and your home. Take care of that first, and everything else will fall into place. It will.
Yeah.
It will. And knowing that, always do good, right? Always do right. All of these basic principles of life, and good things will happen to you. I mean, it's that simple.
Yeah.
You want to wake up and, sometimes I'm in my grog of mummying or whatever, and some don't feel like showering that morning, but you got to get up, make that space beautiful.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
You've got your playroom with your kids, make that space beautiful.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. So all of these different things, just make it beautiful.
Yeah.
Make it beautiful and make honey.
Making honey.
That's it.
All right. Thank you guys for hanging out. We'll be right back.
Every day a woman reigns.
You're watching Trish Stanley TV, where the everyday woman reigns.
Woman reigns.
I'd like to thank my guest today, Joe. I mean, the whole set, the whole team is just still in an uproar over her amazing story of just leaving. Just imagine leaving this life and then being returned to this life. It's just amazing. We also had the honor of chatting with her husband, who shared his side of this experience. And they're just a wonderful couple, a loving couple. Make sure you go and support, purchase that book. I believe she has journals on her site as well. Just go and support her. And I have to say, as I leave every broadcast, that love isn't love unless you give it away. And we saw a representation of true love here today. Thank you guys for tuning in.